In the kitchen of Sedmere Hall on a December morning that smelled of cinnamon and wood smoke, the third Duke of Sedmere had flour on both hands and was being told, very calmly by someone who was not his staff, to stop pressing quite so hard. "You're fighting it," said Dorothea Pemberton, who was standing beside him with flour on her cheek and the focused expression of a woman conducting a tutorial she had not expected to give. "Pastry is not a confrontation. It is a conversation." "I am a duke," said Clement Devereux. "I have staff for this." "Your staff," she said, "is watching from the doorway and finding this educational." He looked. Mrs. Birch was, in fact, watching from the doorway. Her face wore the expression of someone actively suppressing something, joy perhaps or relief, which on Mrs. Birch was the equivalent of a standing ovation. Clermont looked at his hands. He looked at the pastry which had begun in the last several minutes to cooperate. He looked at Dorothea, who was watching him with the patient attention of someone who had seen worse beginners and expected him to improve. "It is," he said, "a conversation." "Yes, I am having it." "You are," she said, and there was something in the way she said it, warm and precise and entirely unimpressed by his title, that made him go still for a moment. The kitchen was very warm. Outside, the December frost lay across the park in long grey sheets. Particular, the Duke's Irish setter was asleep near the fire in the attitude of a dog who has made several decisions about belonging and considers the matter resolved. But I am getting ahead of myself. This story begins, as the best of them do, with pie. In the village of Ashbrook, in the autumn of 1815, a widow's daughter named Dorothea Pemberton offered a slice of pie to the most solitary man in Somersetshire, and did not especially expect it to change anything. The Duke of Sedmere had been grieving quietly for 2 years, and the village had learned to leave him to it. Dorothea, who had never been good at leaving things to their worst outcome when a small intervention might help, offered him the pie anyway. He asked if the baker came with it. She told him no and laughed, and that was when he began to pay attention. "If you are listening tonight, tell me where you are, the city, the season outside your window." I read everyone. The parish harvest fair came to Ashbrook every October with the stubborn optimism of something that had never once been cancelled, despite the weather's persistent attempts. Reverend Cope organized it, with the calm authority of a man who understood that God and logistics were not always in agreement, and that the best one could do was to arrange the tables under shelter and pray that the rain held off until tea time. In 1815, the rain held off until 11 o'clock in the morning, which Reverend Cope declared a victory. Dorothea Pemberton had been contributing to the charity sale since she was 16, when she had produced a lopsided apple cake that her Aunt Rosamond had described, kindly and incorrectly, as charming. By 26, she had refined the operation considerably. She arrived at the fair with 6 pies and a basket of pastries, set up her table between Mrs. Farrow's preserves and Mr. Gibbs's honey, and began cutting samples with the efficiency of someone who knows that charity requires both goodwill and a sharp knife. She was tall for a woman of her generation, not absurdly so, but enough to see over most of the crowd without difficulty, and she had a long, honest face that defaulted, when she was not thinking about it, to an expression of mild amusement at the world. Her eyes were a deep, considered violet, the particular shade that appears in the hour before dusk, and her hair was dark and pinned with the haste of someone whose priorities had not included her own appearance before 6 in the morning. She wore a warm red shawl over her grey dress. She had been up since 5. She was entirely content. Her Aunt Rosamond arrived at 8:30, examined the pies, selected a piece of the damson tart for herself, and said, "He is here." Dorothea did not look up. "Who is here?" "The Duke." She looked up. Clement Devereux, 3rd Duke of Sedmere, stood at the edge of the fair with the expression of a man who had come for a specific purpose and was reconsidering whether the purpose was sufficient. He was somewhere past 35, with dark hair beginning to silver at the temples, and the build of someone who had spent years outdoors and had not abandoned the habit. His face was not unkind. It was simply used, the way a room looks when the fire has not been lit in it for some time. The village knew his face, the village knew his grief. His wife, the Duchess of Sedmere, had died of a fever in the summer of 1813, and in the 2 years since, the Duke had appeared in Ashbrook precisely as often as duty demanded and no more. He had managed his estate quietly and without complaint, and had declined every invitation from every neighbour with such consistent courtesy that eventually the invitations had slowed. He was not cold exactly. He was just very, very careful. He was speaking with Reverend Cope now, which was probably why he had come. Some arrangement about the Sedmere contribution to the Winter Charity Fund, most likely. Dorothea watched him for a moment longer than was strictly polite, noted the slight stiffness in his shoulders and went back to cutting tarts. The fair continued around her. She sold 4 pies and most of the pastries before 11, talked Mrs. Farrow through a dispute with Mr. Gibbs about the relative merits of blackcurrant versus damson, and directed 2 children who had become separated from their parents with the practiced ease of someone who is comfortable in mild chaos. At 11 o'clock, when the rain had not yet appeared and the fair was at its fullest, she looked up and found the Duke standing at her table. He was not looking at the pies. He was looking at her, not with the pointed attention of a man attempting charm, but in the speculative way of someone who has registered an unexpected detail and is not yet sure what to do with it. "The damson tart," Dorothea said, "is the best thing on the table if you're deciding." He blinked. "I was not." "You were looking at the table. It is the natural conclusion." She picked up a slice and held it out on a small square of paper, as she had done for the last 3 hours to everyone who paused. "Try it. It is for charity, and it is also genuinely excellent, which is a combination you should not pass up." There was a pause. Clement Devereux, who had been offered things all his life in ways that required him to assess the offer, before accepting the political offer, the social offer, the matrimonial offer dressed as a dinner invitation, looked at the piece of damson tart on a square of paper, held out by a woman who appeared to be waiting without particular expectation for his decision. "I do not know who you are," he said. "Dorothea Pemberton. My father was your estate physician before he died." She said it the way she always said it, directly, without the performance of tragedy, because he had been gone 3 years now and grief could be carried without making it the first thing in every sentence. "I live with my aunt on Church Lane. I bake." She gestured at the table. "Often." He took the tart. He ate it with the brief, unhurried attention of someone actually tasting something rather than performing the act. Then he said, "Your father was a good physician." It was exactly the right thing to say, not the usual murmur of condolence, not the performance of sympathy, just the simple fact. "He was," she said. "The tart is very good." "I know." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, more the precursor to one, the faint movement that happens just before someone remembers that smiling is a thing they used to do. "What would it cost," he said, "to take the rest home?" "For charity? 1 shilling the pie, or you could take a slice of each and donate separately." She began cutting with the readiness of someone who has made this offer before. "The apricot and almond is unusual. The chicken and leek is better than it sounds. You made all of these yourself?" "Everyone since 5 this morning." She glanced up at him. "I find that baking before the world is awake is the most productive use of the hour. No one interrupts and the kitchen is entirely mine." He looked at her. A long, considering look that she was beginning to understand was his default mode of attention, the way some people led with words, and he led with careful watching. "Only if the baker comes with it," he said. She stopped cutting for exactly 1 second. Then she laughed, a real laugh, unpremeditated, the kind that surfaces when something genuinely catches you off guard. "That," she said, "is not on offer today. A pity." "6 pies, Your Grace, no bakers. I'm afraid those are the terms of the charity sale." She wrapped the pies with the brisk efficiency of someone who has done this many times, handed them across the table, and accepted his coin with the same matter-of-fact energy she brought to every transaction. He thanked her. She thanked him. He walked away with his pies and she watched him go, the straight back, the measured step, the particular quality of a man who does not know he is being watched because he has spent 2 years assuming no one is paying attention. "Well," said Aunt Rosamond, appearing beside her with the second piece of damson tart she had been saving for the right moment. He bought all 6 pies, Dorothea said. He bought something else as well, her aunt said. He just does not know what yet. Aunt Rosamond. I'm 73 and I have seen considerably more than you, said Aunt Rosamond, who was 58 and had always known the value of rounding up. The note arrived 4 days later, which Dorothea found significant. Not 3 days, which would have been eager. Not a week, which would have been either cautious or uninterested. 4 days suggested deliberation. It was written in a precise hand on very good paper, and it said in essence that the Duke of Sedmere was organizing a small charitable supper for his estate workers before the winter set in, and that Reverend Cope had suggested Miss Pemberton as someone with considerable experience in such arrangements, and that if she were available and willing to consult on the matter, the Duke would consider it a particular kindness. She read it twice. She noted the word consult. She noted the phrase particular kindness, which was a very dukey way of saying I would appreciate it. She wrote back the same afternoon that she was available on Thursday at 10 o'clock if that suited. It suited. Sedmere Hall was 3 miles from Ashbrook, through country that had gone properly autumnal. The oaks shedding in earnest, the lanes thick with leaves the colour of cold copper, the whole world smelling of damp earth and something on the edge of ending. Dorothea walked it because walking was how she thought and she had things to think about. She had known Sedmere Hall since childhood. Her father had been summoned there many times, for the usual summer colds, for a broken wrist from a riding incident, and finally, and terribly, for the Duchess in the last weeks of her illness. Dorothea had been 23 then, and she had sometimes sat with Helena Devereux while her father attended to the more practical ministrations, because Helena had been only 31 and frightened and very good at hiding it, and Dorothea had always been steady company for people who needed steadiness. She had not seen Clement Devereux since the funeral. He met her in the entrance hall, which was large and slightly colder than it should have been at this time of year, and smelled faintly of wood ash and something floral. Old lavender sachets from a drawer left open somewhere, she thought. A dog came with him, a large Irish setter, copper red from ears to tail, with the expression of a Roman senator, assessing a new delegation and reserving judgment. Particular, the Duke said, by way of introduction. Dorothea held her hand out. Particular sniffed it with great thoroughness, considered, and then sat down on her foot. That, said Mrs. Birch, the housekeeper, who had appeared behind the Duke with the expression of someone braced for disappointment, is a significant event. He has not done that to anyone since— She stopped herself. Since the late Duchess, Dorothea said, so that the sentence could end. Mrs. Birch nodded. Just so. Clement looked at Particular sitting on Dorothea's foot, and then at Dorothea, with an expression she was learning to read as him processing information he had not expected and not yet knowing what to do with it. She did not help him. She simply reached down and scratched Particular behind the ears, which Particular received with the dignity of someone accepting what was owed. They toured the kitchen together, which was Dorothea's primary concern, and the most honest portrait of a household she knew. The Sedmere kitchen was large and equipped and organized with Mrs. Birch's characteristic precision, but it had the quality of a room being maintained rather than used. Everything clean, nothing lived in. The surfaces clear in the specific way of spaces that see no daily activity beyond the strictly necessary. How many estate workers will attend the supper? She asked, moving through the kitchen with the quick cataloguing attention she brought to any space she was expected to feed people in. 32, possibly 34, if the Kelsey family attends. And you are intending to serve— Mrs. Birch has a proposed menu. Mrs. Birch produced the proposed menu with the expression of someone handing over a document they had limited confidence in. Dorothea read it. It was adequate. It was also, in her honest opinion, the menu of someone who had been managing this alone for 2 years and was tired and doing their best, which was a different thing from thriving. I have a few suggestions, she said. She made approximately 14 suggestions, all specific and practical, delivered in the tone of someone who is not criticizing but rather solving things. And by the end of it, Mrs. Birch was looking at her with the expression of a woman who has been carrying a weight she had not known she could put down. You should stay for tea, Mrs. Birch said. Yes, said the Duke, who had been standing in the corner of the kitchen watching the two of them with the expression he wore when he was not sure what he was observing. She should. They had tea in the morning room, which was warmer than the entrance hall and had better light, and the general quality of a room that had once been used with pleasure. Particular lay between Dorothea's chair and the Duke's, with the territorial satisfaction of a dog who has selected his position and considers the matter decided. "Your father," Clement said over his second cup. "He spoke of you." She was genuinely surprised. "Did he? He said you had the disposition of someone who would find something to do with every situation." He considered this. He meant it as praise. "He usually did," she said, and felt the familiar quiet of it, that particular love that does not disappear when the person does, only changes its shape. "He was a practical man. He was the best physician I've ever known." His voice was careful, and I had the chance to tell him so in the last year of his life. "I am glad of it." Dorothea looked at him. "Thank you for that," she said. It was a real exchange, not a social ritual, not a performance of comfort, just two people who had lost someone they respected, acknowledging that the loss existed and did not need to be managed away. The estate supper happened on the 15th of November and was, by the unambiguous measure of 34 estate workers eating everything on the table, a considerable success. Dorothea had spent 3 days at Sedmere Hall in the preceding week, working with Mrs. Birch through the cooking with the collaborative energy of two women who had each been managing things alone for too long and had discovered with some relief that this was easier together. The Duke had appeared at intervals to answer questions about numbers, about the estate's contributions to the winter charity fund, about whether Mr. Holt, the head gardener, had any particular requirements, and each time had been somewhat more comfortable in the kitchen than the last. By the third day, he had stopped standing in the corner and started standing at the table, and he had answered every question about estate logistics with the quiet competence of a man who paid close attention to the people on his land and did not think this required any particular acknowledgement. Dorothea filed this away. After the supper, walking home through the cold November dark, she found herself thinking about the things she had noticed. The estate accounts, which she had glanced at legitimately since they related to the food budget, were meticulous. The tenants, when she had talked with them at the supper, spoke of the Duke with the particular warmth of people who feel genuinely looked after rather than merely administered. The kitchen garden, which she had walked through on her way to the house, had been expanded this year with more productive variety. None of this matched the story the village told about him. The solitary Duke, the grieving man, the difficult neighbour. She was still thinking about it 2 days later, when she picked up the December charity basket for the Kelsey family. Old Mr. Kelsey had fallen ill in September, and there were 3 children under 10, and Dorothea had been making quiet contributions since October. In the practical, anonymous way she did most things she considered simply necessary. She arrived at the cottage to find the basket she had left the previous week sitting beside a second one. She opened it. It contained a full bottle of medicine from the Taunton apothecary, the specific preparation the doctor had prescribed, which cost more than Dorothea had been able to spare. A length of good warm wool, the kind that wouldn't scratch. 2 books for the children, wrapped in oilcloth against the damp, and a note, unsigned, that said only, "For the Kelsey family," with best wishes for Mr. Kelsey's recovery. And Mrs. Kelsey, a capable woman in her 30s, who had been raised not to accept charity without dignity, and had managed to make this quality very useful, said that the baskets had been arriving since October. Always anonymous, always exactly what was needed. "Do you know who it is?" Dorothea asked. "I have a suspicion," Mrs. Kelsey said, "but whoever it is, they don't want to be known, so I won't say." Dorothea walked home thinking about medicines from Taunton and wool that cost more than it ought, and books wrapped in oilcloth against the damp. She thought about a Duke who had spent 2 years quietly expanding his kitchen garden and managed his tenants with meticulous care, and had told her father he was the best physician he had ever known, in time to mean it. She did not say anything to anyone. There was nothing yet to say. But she stopped thinking of Clement Devereux as a man who had retreated from the world. She started thinking of him as a man who was in it, very quietly, in ways he had taken no trouble to make visible. She saw him the following Sunday at the village church, where he attended the morning service, with the same quiet consistency that she was beginning to understand characterized everything he did. She sat 3 rows ahead of him. She did not look back. But she was aware, in the specific way that awareness operates when it is paying close attention to a particular person in a room, of exactly where he was throughout. Reverend Cope preached on the subject of charity, which may or may not have been coincidental. Afterwards, in the cold churchyard, Clement paused beside her. "The supper," he said. "Mrs. Birch asked me to tell you it has been the most discussed topic in the kitchen since it happened. She would like to know if you would consider advising on the Christmas supper as well." Mrs. Birch could easily manage a Christmas supper on her own, Dorothea said. "Yes," he agreed. She said the same thing. She asked anyway. There was a pause that had become, over the last several weeks, comfortable in the specific way that pauses between 2 people become comfortable when the people concerned have stopped performing for each other. "Tell Mrs. Birch I will come on Tuesday," Dorothea said. "I will tell her." He paused. "I should also mention, the morning room fire is properly attended now. Mrs. Birch spent considerable time determining the source of the draught." She looked at him. He was not quite smiling, but the corners of his hazel eyes were doing something that was the precursor to it. "The east window," she guessed. "The east window," he confirmed. "I noticed it in November," she said. "I thought it would be presumptuous to mention." It would not have been. She looked at him for a moment, in the cold churchyard in the pale November light. "Then I will mention things as I notice them," she said. "I would prefer it," he said, which she was beginning to understand was his way of saying, "Yes, please." She found the orangery on a Tuesday morning in December, while Mr. Holt was showing her the kitchen garden's winter beds, dormant and brown and oddly orderly, like a sleeping library. It stood at the south end of the walled garden, a long glass structure, original to the 1790s rebuilding of the house, with the characteristic iron framework of its era and glass panes that had gone faintly green with age and neglect. Several panes were cracked. The interior, visible through the unclouded sections, was half full of overwintered pots and old gardening equipment, and the general accumulation of a space that has been used as storage because using it for its original purpose had become too difficult. "What was it?" she asked Mr. Holt. "Orangery," he said, with the brevity of a man who considers the question self-answering. "I know what it was. What did it grow?" "Citrus when it was properly kept, fig myrtle. The late Duchess grew herbs in the glass-paned section nearest the door, basil and tarragon and things that don't manage the English winter on their own." He paused. She was fond of it. Dorothea stood at the door of the orangery and looked through the green-hazed glass at the pots inside, at the rusted trowels, at the cracked staging where the plants had once stood in their proper rows. She said nothing for a moment. "Could it be restored?" she finally asked. Mr. Holt looked at her the way people in the country look at questions they have been wanting to answer for a long time. "Yes," he said. "I've thought so for 2 years." "What has prevented you?" He did not answer immediately, and she understood without being told. Not his decision. Never his decision. You do not restore the dead Duchess's orangery without asking the Duke. She did not ask the Duke that day. She asked him instead about the Christmas supper menu, and about whether the Kelsey family had received the additional provisions he had. She paused, watching his face, arranged through the parish. He went very still. "You know about that?" "I guessed," she said. "The medicines were from the Taunton apothecary. I know what they cost." He said nothing. He had the expression of a man who has been caught at something private and has not yet decided whether to be embarrassed or not. "It is a very good thing you are doing," she said directly, because she was not going to make him navigate her gratitude as though it were a complication. "You have been doing it for 2 years, Mrs. Kelsey told me. She was not supposed to—" "She didn't say it was you. She said she had a suspicion and would keep it. I worked the rest out myself." She looked at him steadily. "I wanted you to know that I know. I will not tell anyone. But I thought you should know that someone had noticed." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, with an effort she could hear, My wife grew up in a household that was not careful with its money, and as a consequence she was always careful to see where the gaps were. She began the arrangements. After she died, He stopped. It seemed wrong to stop. Dorothea held very still, because this was the most he had said about Helena in any of their conversations, and she understood that this was not a moment that wanted filling. After a moment she said, "She sounds like someone who paid attention." "She did," he said simply, "to everything." They were in the morning room, and the fire was properly burning now, and outside the December light was cold and clear, and the park was brown and very quiet. "I should like to ask you something," Dorothea said, and he looked at her. "About the orangery." She asked him simply whether Mr. Holt might begin restoration work in the new year, whether the glass could be reglazed, whether the staging could be rebuilt, whether she might be permitted to assist in thinking through the planting when the time came. He was quiet for long enough that she thought she had misjudged. Then he said, she would have liked that. And she understood, from the particular quality of how he said it, not as resistance but as something considerably more complicated, that the reason the orangery had not been touched was not indifference, but its opposite. That he had looked at it, in the 2 years since Helena died, and found it simply easier not to. "I think," Dorothea said carefully, "that restoring it is not the same as forgetting it." He looked at her. His eyes were hazel in the morning light, a warm, complicated color that shifted depending on what he was thinking about. "No," he said after a moment, "I suppose it is not." She found the orangery when they walked through the garden afterwards. She had asked to see it properly, and he had come with her, which she had not entirely expected. They stood at the glass door in the winter cold, looking in at the overwintered pots and the rusted equipment and the green-hazed light, and neither of them spoke for a while. Then he opened the door, which stuck, and they went in. It was colder inside than out, which is the character of neglected glasshouses in December. It smelled of old soil and rust and something faintly herbal, the ghost of basil and tarragon from someone else's planting. The light came through the aged glass in a particular way, dispersed and underwater soft, the way good light will find a way in regardless. Dorothea stood in the center of it and looked up at the iron framework, at the long shelving along the south wall, at the corner with the best exposure to the winter sun. "It has very good bones," she said. "It does," he agreed, from beside her. She glanced at him. He was looking at the old staging, the iron framework where the plants had stood, with an expression she could not entirely read. Not grief exactly, something past grief. The careful, considered quality of a person deciding something for the first time in a long while. "I will speak with Holt," he said, "about the glass." "The glazier in Taunton does good work," she said. "Reverend Cope used him for the vestry window. I know Cope's window." He looked at her. Something in his expression was different now, less careful, more present. "You have opinions about glaziers." "I have opinions about most things," she said. "It is a failing." "It is," he said, "the opposite of that." The recipe box appeared in the Sedmere kitchen on the 3rd Tuesday of December. It was a plain wooden box, lacquered dark with HED inlaid in the lid, Helena Emma Devereux, the late Duchess's initials, and it contained, when Mrs. Birch brought it out with the expression of someone doing a thing they had been putting off for 2 years, a considerable quantity of handwritten recipes, menus and notes. "I thought you might sort through them," Mrs. Birch said, "for the Christmas planning. She had good sense, the Duchess. There are things in here that don't appear in any of the household books." Dorothea sat at the kitchen table with the box and went through it methodically, the way she went through most things, with proper attention and no sentimentality about the work itself, though considerable respect for what she was looking at. Helena Devereux had had the handwriting of someone who wrote quickly and thought faster, not careless but efficient, with the particular quality of a mind always slightly ahead of the pen. There were menus for the estate Christmas supper going back to 1809. There were recipes clipped from various publications, annotated in Helena's hand. "This one is better with less sugar. This one requires twice the stated quantity of butter. This one is simply wrong and should be disregarded unless you want disappointment. The last note made Dorothea smile. At the bottom of the box, beneath a sheaf of household menus, was an envelope. It was sealed. It bore on the outside in Helena's hand, "DP, to be given when found." Dorothea looked at it for a long moment. DP Dorothea Pemberton. She sat with it in her hands for several minutes, in the warm kitchen, with Mrs. Birch tactfully busy at the other end of the room, and particular asleep near the range, with the deep soundness of a dog who has decided this kitchen is his now. Then she opened it. It was not long. One page, in Helena's efficient hand. "If this reaches you, I'm gone. I hope it finds you well. Your father sat with me in October and we talked for some time about many things, and he spoke of his eldest daughter, who bakes better than anyone in the county and has never let anyone make her small, which is the most important skill there is and the most difficult to maintain. I did not get to know you as I should have liked. I am sorry for that. You would have been a friend I was glad of. There is one thing I will tell you, which is that this house is a good house and Clement is a better man than he knows how to show at the moment. He is learning. Be patient with him if you find yourself here. He is worth it. I leave this with only one request. Do not let the orangery go to ruin. It was always the best room in the house, and it would pain me to think of it empty. Your father spoke very well of you. I was glad to know him. H.E.D. Dorothea sat in the warm kitchen with the letter in her hands and said nothing at all for some time. Then she put it carefully back in the envelope and held it, the way you hold something that is fragile, not because it is old, but because it is true. She found Clement in his study, where he was working through estate correspondence with the steady concentration of a man who has spent 2 years making work the most reliable part of his life. He looked up when she came in. Particular, who had apparently followed her from the kitchen without either of them noticing, sat down beside her and looked at Clement with the satisfied expression of a dog who considers this arrangement satisfactory. "I found something in the recipe box," she said. She held out the envelope. He saw the initials and went very still. "It is addressed to me," she said. "I have already read it. I thought you should know it exists, and I thought—" She paused. "I thought you might want to know what it says." He did not take the envelope immediately. He looked at it for a moment with the expression of someone standing at a door they have left closed for a long time, working out whether to open it. "Tell me," he said quietly. So she told him. She did not read it aloud, and it was hers, and she kept it. But she told him what Helena had written, about the house, about him, about the orangery. She said it simply, without softening it or adding anything of her own. He listened with his eyes on his desk and his hands very still. When she was done, there was a silence. "She was right," he said at last, "about the house." A pause. "About all of it." Dorothea said nothing. She had learned in the past weeks that he processed things in space and quiet, and that the most useful thing she could offer him when he was working something out was exactly that, space and quiet, without the pressure of a response expected on the other side. He looked up at her eventually. The study was getting dark. It was barely 3:30 in December, and the candles had not yet been lit, and the fire had burned down to something low and amber. "She knew you," he said, "or knew of you. Your father talked about you. So it seems. She was always—" He stopped, began again. "She noticed things, people. She would have—" He stopped again, and something in his expression shifted in the firelight. Not grief alone, but something beneath it, something deciding. "She would have been a friend," Dorothea said. She said so. He looked at her. The hazel of his eyes in the low amber light had gone a very warm, complicated color. "Yes," he said, "she would have." Dorothea set the letter carefully on the corner of his desk. "I'm going to speak with Holt about the orangery planting plan tomorrow," she said, "if that is still all right." "It is," he said. She left him in the darkening study with Helena's letter on his desk and went back to the warm kitchen and stood for a moment with her hands flat on the scrubbed wood of the table, feeling the day settle around her. "You are very intelligent for a setter," she told him. He put his chin on her knee. The glazier came from Taunton on the 22nd of December, and spent 2 days working through the orangery with Mr. Holt, replacing the cracked panes and resecuring the iron frame. The work was audible from the kitchen in the faint musical way of glass being handled with care, and on the second morning, Dorothea found herself pausing in the middle of making pastry to listen to it. The Christmas supper happened on the 23rd, which was 4 days earlier than Helena had traditionally arranged it, because Dorothea had looked at the estate calendar and determined that the 27th was too close to the holiday itself for anyone to enjoy either occasion properly. The Duke had deferred to her entirely on this, which was a new behaviour and one she was not entirely sure what to do with. The supper was large and warm and very loud, in the way that 34 people being genuinely comfortable in a room will always be loud. Mrs. Birch sat down for the first time at an estate supper in 2 years, which Dorothea had arranged by the simple method of organising everything in advance and removing all reasons for Mrs. Birch to remain on her feet. Particular moved between the tables with the considered approval of a Roman senator attending a provincial feast and finding it adequate. Clement sat at the head of the table and was present in a way that was different from October. Not performing presence, not managing distance, simply there. He talked with Mr. Holt about the spring planting and with old Mr. Parsons about the new drainage work along the east field, and with the Kelsey children, who had been included this year for the first time, about whether it was possible to teach a dog to play chess. Particular is too intelligent for chess, Dorothea said from 3 seats away. He would find it insulting. Clement looked across at her. You have strong opinions about Particular's intellectual requirements. He has made his requirements very clear, she said. And the table laughed and Clement smiled, a real one, the full expression of it, entirely unguarded. And she felt something shift quietly in her chest that she had not been expecting. After the supper, when the estate workers had gone home and Mrs. Birch had retired, and the kitchen staff were clearing up with the efficient quiet of people who are tired but satisfied, Dorothea was wrapping the remaining food in the larder and calculating whether it was too late to walk home and whether Aunt Rosamond would be sitting up. Clement appeared in the kitchen doorway. I will drive you, he said. It is 8 o'clock and 3 miles in December. It is perfectly passable on foot, she said. It is well below freezing and perfectly passable is not the point, he said. She looked at him. He had the expression of a man making a practical argument about something that was not entirely practical. All right, she said. They drove in the small carriage, which was the sensible choice for 3 December miles, with Particular between them occupying rather more than his share of the seat with the territorial good nature of a dog who has decided how things should be arranged and sees no reason to revisit the question. You organised tonight very well, Clement said, which she understood by now was his way of saying something more than the words themselves contained. Mrs. Birch and I organised it, she said. I mainly reorganised the calendar. You reorganised several things, he said. I have a habit of it, she said. I apologise if it was... I was not objecting, he said. I was noting it as a quality. He was quiet for a moment. Outside, the lane ran between bare hedges in the moonlight, the cold, clear December night making the world look like something rendered in silver. I have been thinking about the orangery. Holt says the panes are all repaired now. I know, I was with him today. Another pause. I was thinking about the planting plan. You mentioned you had ideas. I have a great many ideas, she said. The citrus won't survive a hard winter without reliable heat. Herbs are more practical, but there is a corner with better sun exposure where a lemon tree could be attempted if you are willing to be occasionally disappointed. I am, he said, becoming more tolerant of occasional disappointment. She glanced at him. He was looking at the road ahead, his profile in the moonlight clear and composed. That is a considerable change from October, she said. October was a different month. It was the same you. No, he said. It was not. She let that sit. The carriage turned onto the lane toward Church Street, and the familiar shapes of the village appeared, the church tower, the mill, the line of cottages with their lit windows warm against the dark. Miss Pemberton, he said, and stopped. She waited. I would like, he said, with the careful deliberateness of someone who has chosen every word in advance and is still not certain they are the right ones, to ask whether you would consider coming to Sedmere, not as an advisor, and not for the charitable arrangements, and not for any supper, but—" He paused. "I am making rather poor work of this." "You are doing adequately," she said. "I would like you to come to Sedmere because I would very much like you to be there," he said. "Permanently. In whatever—" He stopped again. "That is also not quite what I mean." She waited, because he was trying to find the right words, and she had learned that the best thing she could do when he was working something out was to let him. "Will you marry me?" he said at last, flat and direct and very slightly desperate. "So that you can finish what you have started in the orangery, and because Particular has made a decision that I think we should both take seriously, and because you are the only person I have spoken with in 2 years who treats me like a human being, rather than a circumstance. And because—" He paused, and his voice became quieter. "Because I find I am not, as it turns out, as prepared to have you leave at the end of each day as I have been telling myself I am." The carriage had stopped outside Aunt Rosamond's cottage. The horse stood with the patient stoicism of horses in December. Particular had not moved. Dorothea was quiet for long enough that she felt him go very still beside her. "I told you," she said, "at the harvest fair, that the baker was not on offer." "You did." "I appear," she said, "to have revised my terms." He looked at her. In the moonlight his face was very clear. "Is that a yes?" he said. "It is an obvious yes," she said, "delivered in the manner of someone who has been waiting for you to ask the right question for approximately 6 weeks. He laughed. It was a surprised sound, rough and genuine and entirely unguarded, and it startled Particular into lifting his head, and Particular looked between them with the deep satisfaction of a dog who has made several correct predictions and been proven right. "I should have asked sooner," he said. "You asked at exactly the right moment," she said. "You were not ready sooner." "No." A long pause. "I was not." She gave him her hand. He held it with the care of someone handling something they do not intend to damage, and outside the December moon was very clear and very cold, and Aunt Rosamond's cottage had a light in the window that was about to go on for a very long time. 6 months later, in June, the orangery produced its first lemon. This was treated as the significant event it was. Mr. Holt mentioned it to Mrs. Birch, with the understated satisfaction of someone who had been right about the south-facing corner for 3 years. Mrs. Birch told Clement at breakfast, who went to see it immediately with Particular at his heels and flour on his hands from the morning's baking instruction, which had become a regular feature of Thursdays at Sedmere Hall, and which Cook had received with the pragmatic tolerance of a professional who has determined that the alternative is worse. Dorothea was already in the orangery when he arrived. She was in her oldest gardening apron, the one Aunt Rosamond had described as no longer respectable, and which Dorothea had kept for precisely that reason, and she was looking at the lemon with the expression of someone who has coaxed something difficult into existence and finds the result quietly gratifying. "There it is," she said. "There it is," he agreed. The orangery was full of June morning light and the smell of warm herbs and something green and growing. The pots along the south wall were producing basil and tarragon and a small rosemary that Dorothea was still in quiet argument with. The lemon tree stood in its terracotta pot in the corner, Mr. Holt's suggestion, which Dorothea had been prepared to admit was correct, bearing its first small, faintly green fruit. Clement stood beside her. Particular found a patch of morning sun on the stone floor, lay down in it with the decisiveness of a dog who knows good light when he finds it, and went to sleep. "She would have liked this," Dorothea said. "Yes," he said. "She would." He reached out and covered her hand with his, the quiet, unhurried gesture of someone who has stopped managing distance and started doing the actual work of being present. She turned her hand and held his. The lemon was small and still faintly green, and it smelled already of something warm and sharp and full of what was coming. Outside, beyond the glass, the Sedmere Park lay in the full reach of a June morning. The oak walk gold green, the roses along the south wall in their first flush, the whole world open and unhurried. This is what it looks like when a house decides to be alive again, one lemon at a time, one Thursday at a time, one person who says yes when she means it, and one person who finally finds the right question to ask. Stories told with quiet love.
December kitchen, cinnamon and smoke. Flour on my hands like a man who forgot how to hope. You said you're fighting it with calm in your eyes. Pastry ain't a war, love, it's a quiet reply. Outside the frost lay silver on the park. Inside you stood there, light cutting through the dark. Red shawl, violet dusk, a laugh I didn't plan. And just like that I was learning how to be a man again. I bought 6 pies and something I couldn't name. Walked 3 cold miles and nothing felt the same. So take my hand, don't mind the title on the door. I don't need a duchess, I need you on this floor. Talk to the door, talk soft into my bones. Make this cold house remember what it means to be a home. One slice, one smile, one ordinary night. We're building something gentle, one lemon at a time. Harvest fair in Ashbrook, autumn in the air. You held out damps and talked like you had love to spare. I asked if the baker came with it. You laughed and said no, but baby, I was already hoping you might never go. Particular chose your foot before I chose my words. And Helena left a letter that I finally heard. Be patient with him, she wrote in careful ink. This house is good, and he's better than he thinks. Glass in the orangery green with years of rain. We fixed the broken panes and let the light back in again. So take my hand, don't mind the title on the door. I don't need a duchess, I need you on this floor. Talk to the door, talk soft into my bones. Make this cold house remember what it means to be a home. One slice, one smile, one ordinary night. We're building something gentle, one lemon at a time. I wasn't ready in October, grief still sitting in the chair. But you never asked me to be finished, you just stayed and breathed the air. Carriage in the moonlight, 3 miles of December cold. I asked you poorly, desperately. You said yes like pure gold. I revised my terms, you whispered soft and sure and kind. And every empty room behind us finally changed its mind. So take my hand, the fire's lit, the morning room is warm. Particulars asleep in sun, he knew this all along. Talk to the door, talk soft into my bones. This house decided it would live again with you alone. One vow, one Thursday, flower on both our hands. We're growing something holy in this little patch of land. One heart, one kitchen, one forever kind. We're loving something real now, one lemon at a time. Yeah, she would've liked this, and so do I.